Rabbi, we can't hear you at all for the entire time. We haven't been able to hear you.
Hello, do you hear me now? Yakir?
Yeah, now we got you.
Okay, I don't know. Shoot, I don't know what you guys did. Nobody, so nothing that I said was heard so far?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay, so let me start again from the beginning then. Good afternoon, everybody. Shalom Aleichem. Nice to see all of you. I guess I was talking to myself for the last few minutes. Bottom line, CHYE, we're here to your community business resource center. We're here to empower you guys with the tools to get ahead in your businesses and your professional life. We have a monthly webinar series, and today our class is on Excel. As we conveyed in the marketing, I just want to set the stage here. This is a beginner's class. If you know Excel well and you came here because you want to learn deep tools and tricks, that's not today's class. Today's class is a much more superficial class. It's covering more of the basic functions and features. Excel is a tool that can be used under tremendous amount of different circumstances in your business to track numbers and finances. It's a database. And so we have a tremendous teacher, Yakir Haven, who's an expert in Excel, and he's given courses on Excel. Many of you might know him. He's a wonderful mensch and a well-known person here in Crown Heights. And we're honored and thankful that Yakir has made himself available to teach today's class. He really knows his stuff very well. And I'm going to pass on the presentation to him momentarily. I just wanted us to make one announcement, just timely-wise, for those of you living here in the New York area. Every year, CHYE makes a small business expo, okay? This Sunday, God willing, we're doing our annual Crown Heights Business Expo. Our goal is we want to drive business to local business. To have a booth at the expo, you have to be a Lubavitch business owner. And we're calling on the whole community, Shnas Hakel. This is a business Hakel event. Come to the expo, come check out the different services that people have, come network. We're going to have a very inspirational talk that's going to be at 2:30. There'll be a talk first, and then 3 to 6 is the expo. It's in the Beis Rivka Rose Hall, and you're all invited to come. If you want to check out more details about the expo, go to the website, The Chosen Expo. That's thechosenexpo.com. So I'd love to see you all there. Without further ado, I'd like to pass on the presentation to Yakir. I'm actually going to bow out. Yakir, if you need me, message me on my phone, okay? Because I'm going to go step away from the computer. And you guys are all in capable hands with Yakir, so the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Rabbi. Everyone, welcome to this webinar today. Well, I actually have to share a screen, so that's the first thing I'm going to text you about is screen sharing. So everyone just hold your horses for a second. While I just make sure.
No, I made you co-host. You're co-host. You should be able to share right now.
It doesn't seem like it. It says this disabled participant screen sharing.
All right, try now.
Okay, now we're good. All righty, here we go. Okay, so everyone, welcome today. Thank you all for coming from wherever you are around the world. I'm very excited for today's webinar. And as Rabbi Wordy just mentioned, it's definitely just a webinar. It's not a full course. You will learn a lot of things that people who are experienced with Excel themselves still will not know. So just to set the tone interaction-wise, because it's a webinar as opposed to a course, we're going to keep it completely question-free. And then the questions can be at the end. I'm going to stay around for about 10 minutes or however long it takes. So please keep all your questions to yourself for now and just stay muted the entire time. That way we just maximize teaching time, and then we'll go to questions at the end. So first of all, my name is Yakir Haven. As Rabbi Wordy mentioned, I've been doing Excel for about 10 years or so, and I've been teaching it for about 3 years, more recently in the Crown Heights area. I have a whole bunch of courses and private courses, tutoring, things like that. I use it at work all the time. I'm studying data science at school. So lots to do with Excel and Google Sheets all day. So that's basically I have a passion for teaching, and I thought I would get out there and give these skills to the community and to the world, because I feel they're very, very needed, very useful. So as we've said, it's a webinar, it's not a course. Don't feel like this is going to give you the tools you need to become a very familiar user, but it is going to give you a great introduction. You're going to feel very comfortable opening a spreadsheet and starting up. You're going to know lots of tools and techniques that other people may not know. And then when you do go on your own and learn further, you'll be very well equipped. So we have a question that I get asked all the time. What's the difference between Excel and Google Sheets? And the answer can fill up many pages of websites, but it's not relevant, because the real answer that I want to tell you is that we're just talking about spreadsheets. A spreadsheet is just a table of cells which contain data. And whether you say Excel or Google Sheets, I'm going to use both words interchangeably. The point is we're talking about spreadsheets. So this is going to be taught through Google Sheets, but the skills that you want to learn are applicable to Excel, applicable to Google Sheets, and the fundamental concepts are the same. So don't get confused between the two things. The answer is it's a spreadsheet, the same way that Google Docs and Microsoft Word share the Word document. They're just documents. So same thing goes for spreadsheets. So we have about an hour and a half. It's right now 2:11. So we'll go for an hour and a half, or as long as it's, or hopefully even maybe finish a bit early, see how we go. And let's get cracking, guys. So today's outline is as follows. We're going to go through an overview of what spreadsheets are, a few questions, who they're for, what they do. We're going to go over some key ingredients that are required to be a good spreadsheet user, because most people just go on YouTube and they learn functions straight away, and they don't know what's good or what the best thing to do is, how to do best practice. Then we're going to actually get started and show a few things to, some introductory tools and tips. And finally, we'll get down to some brass tacks. We'll begin a little bit complicated stuff, but again, this is all beginners. So really, even the complicated part of beginners is not too hard. And then we'll talk about the road ahead and how to go further from here. So without further ado, the overview. So what are spreadsheets for? This is a question that everyone seems to think that that spreadsheets are only for certain jobs, certain people. What are they for? I don't do data. I don't do finance. I'm just working in business. What are they for? So there's many different uses, and it goes from basic to intermediate to advanced. Basic usage of a spreadsheet could even be a calculator. You could just do 6 plus 10, 10 times 12. You could do what's 18 divided by 2. Many different calculations you can do. It's a very, very basic usage. It can do maths. You can create lists. If you're having a dinner party over and you want to just know everyone's name who's coming, you can use your notes on your app, or you can use a spreadsheet. That's possible. Often, if you're using certain softwares, you might be able to export a lot of data into an Excel file and then just read off the data. That's a very basic usage of a spreadsheet. And then we get to an intermediate level, which is when you're actually using more interaction with the data. So you could be storing or analyzing data. If you have a real estate job and you want to track all your leads, then you could put all that data into a spreadsheet. You could track tasks, like having a sort of a to-do list. I don't recommend actually having a to-do list as a spreadsheet, because there are better apps that have more functionality. But there are times where you have a really niche usage that you want to customize yourself, and you might make your own little task list. You can create charts, which are basically just ways of showing trends in data, whether it's a bar chart or a line chart or dot plots. You can get from very basic charts to very highly statistical ones, and that can have its own course even on just like data visualization. And then we have more advanced usage, which is you could even build a tool for your company where people put something in and then the tool spits out some information for them using some conversion. Or you could run your whole business on Excel if you have multiple different sheets that talk to each other. This one does the financials, this one does the management, this one does the staff, and you could make a whole network, like a database almost. You could even involve automation where you have timers set to go and ping at certain points and do all sorts of fancy things. So there really is a lot you can do out there with spreadsheets, and most of the usage is going to be between sort of intermediate to advanced. Somewhere in this middle area here is where most people are going to be working once they've gotten past the basic stage. Of course, you can always use it for basic usage if you want, but once you have the ability to go further, then you'll realize, oh, I can use it for this, I can use it for that. I'm going to start doing that. So that's the what. Now, the who is an even better question, because ultimately it's great that it has many uses, but is it relevant for me? So in my opinion, I think the short answer is that spreadsheets are useful for everyone. In today's day and age, computers are just available in every job, obviously, and every job that you need, you're going to be using a computer in some form or other, and you're going to be managing some form of data. So the shorter answer is that even if you're a business owner and you want to delegate every single task, at some point or other, you're going to have to look through a spreadsheet for something, even if it's the most high level financial report, which just says that you made $1 million that year. It's going to be on a spreadsheet at some point. So having some capability to use a spreadsheet without necessarily being the best user is still applicable to you. If you want a longer answer, well, then there's your longer answer. If you're any one of these jobs, then definitely you're going to be using Excel, and the list goes on. This list is really just a joke. I mean, ultimately, there's many more jobs out there. And if you work in marketing, if you work in sales, if you work in finances, you work as an office clerk, a loan officer, a data scientist. I mean, I just threw out as many jobs as I can think of right here, and the list goes on and on and on, really. So really, everyone uses it. And the fact that you're here today really means that you understand that you're probably going to use it at some point in your job, or you already do, and you want to get better, or you want to start off. So this is definitely for you. So then the next question is, how do they actually help you? Yes, they can hold data in it, but so can a piece of paper. Yes, they can do maths, but so can you. So, well, maybe. So the question really is, why is it better to use a spreadsheet? So there are three main answers that I believe are the most important. The first one is volume, which means that a spreadsheet can handle many things at once. So you can only do one calculation at once. If you want to do on your paper, 8 plus 10, you get 8, okay, 0, okay, very good, you get 18. A computer can do thousands or millions of calculations all at once, and it can be doing them all the time. So the volume is just innumerable compared to manual, calculator or paper. So in that way, volume is unbelievable. You can track tons of data at one time. The next thing is efficiency. If you were to do the same amount of calculations on paper as you would on Excel, you'd be taking a lot of time. Even if you were a mathematician and you were the best in the world, you would take ages to do 1,000 calculations or 1,000,000 calculations, or to track data and write it all in hand by hand. It would take you forever. So efficiency and time saving is where Excel can be just unbelievable. And finally, accuracy, which is that it doesn't get anything wrong. If something is wrong in the spreadsheet, it's something that you did, unfortunately. The computer uses logical circuits to just calculate everything correctly. There are errors that happen, and that's something that you can deal with along your journey. But ultimately, if the computer says that it's 18, the answer is 18. If it says it's 4 or it's X or it's 22, that's the answer. So accuracy is beyond measure when you're using computers versus manual. So in this way, spreadsheets can do a lot in a short amount of time and get it all right. And that's why people use spreadsheets, because they're just so flexible and they can do everything all at once. So that's the best explanation that I have for how they help you. And ultimately, what a lot of the time you're going to be doing is converting data, which is just raw pieces of numbers and text, into information, which means that it has some insight and some meaning. It's actionable. It's something that talks to you. So data into information, that's a very normal process of data analysis. But even if you aren't a data analyst, which most of you probably aren't, taking any data, even if it's financial, even if it's real estate, even if it's construction, any sort of data, and making it into information that makes sense to you, that's where you actually extract value from a spreadsheet, and you can actually understand what it's telling you and use the numbers that you have available. Because in today's businesses, numbers are everywhere. Every bit of thing that you do, contains data. A friend of mine works in construction, and every day he has to log all the different job sites that he went to and all the different people that he spoke to and what the updates are. So each of those logs has tons of data. It has who made the log, what's in the log, what actually did he write down, which places did he go, what time did he do the log, did he edit it, what's his location at the time. There's data everywhere. And so being able to use the data that you have available to you and make it into information is very useful. That's the end of the overview. Now let's get into some key ingredients about what actually makes a good spreadsheet user. So people get scared sometimes about spreadsheets, that they're not the certain style of person that is meant to use a spreadsheet. They're not an expert. They're not a data analyst or a nerd. So those are really great, but those are not really the key things that make a good user of a spreadsheet. You can be the biggest high roller with the best sunglasses and the best sports car, and you might still need to use a spreadsheet at certain times. And if you do, then these are some ingredients that I feel are important attitude-wise to get things right. Because often people can be really smart and they can be really good at using computers, but when it comes to spreadsheets, their attitude's all off, and it leads them to make mistakes, and then to get confused and upset, frustrated, and then they just cancel the whole idea of spreadsheets in their minds. They lose the functionality, and they're sort of missing out on what it could do for them. So these are the ingredients that I feel are important. So the first one is a somewhat organized mind. And I wrote somewhat because if I wrote just an organized mind, then anyone who thinks they're not organized is out of the game automatically, where that's not true. And what I mean by organized mind is that while a spreadsheet can do so much for you, ultimately, there's no such thing as, a spreadsheet which can just figure out what you want and do it all in one shot. You need to give the computer instructions. You need to program the computer as you want it. So the spreadsheet is only as good as you are. Obviously, it can do things for you, but you have to ask it to do it. If you want to do some complex function, you need to tell the computer to do it, and you need to give it certain inputs so that it can work. You need to put things in the right place to allow the computer to do its thing. If you have a machine that can make some sort of product for you, you need to have like a little factory. You need to have a power source. You need to have space for the machine, and you need to have built the machine. The same way it works for a computer. You have to give the computer what it needs. So by you being organized to a certain extent and not having everything all over the place and knowing what you want before you start just hacking away at the keyboard, that's going to help you be better as a user. And that's going to help you do things in the right way so that when things get more complicated, they're actually still quite simple, because complexity works in different ways with spreadsheets. More data isn't necessarily more complex. That can be very simple. It can be as much as dragging down your mouse and then everything's updated. So as long as you do things in the right way to start with and you're somewhat organized, you should be okay. The next thing is about confidence to learn. This is something that I see all the time with people who I'm talking to about joining my courses, or even people who are already past the level of my course. They ask me, what got you to get to this place where you know so much, or how do I get there, or even not to how to get there, how do I just get better than what I am right now? And oftentimes it's just the ability to click a button on the keyboard or on your mouse and just Google something. It's a confidence thing. Most of what I learned, I did learn a bit at school, but a lot of what I learned about Google Sheets and about spreadsheets and these things is just from Googling things. When I had real life problems at work and I wanted to figure out how to do something, I would spend a couple hours sometimes, get into this zone and just Google things. And some of the answers you find on forums are good and you can adapt them to your own circumstance. Some of them are not good, so you can leave them out for next time. Some of them are on Google's own website. I mean, the internet is full of discussions and forums about how to use things, and your problem, which might seem so specific to you, actually has probably been done already before. So if you Google enough and you search enough, you'll probably find the answer to your question at some point, whether it's just using these two functions together, or whether it's dragging something this way instead of this way. There's so many, the software is so large and there's so much to do with it, and the diversity of what you can do is just amazing, that people use it for all different sorts of things. So therefore, if you have a problem that you think is going to happen, you can look it up online and it's okay. You don't have to know everything all in one shot. And if it take you 2 hours, you could make a mistake. You could bash your head against the computer. And eventually, if you have the right confidence, you'll figure it out. So the idea is you're going to have to learn on your own at some point, because no course that you could take will ever get you to the point where you know everything, because there is no everything. Excel is too big to know everything. But all you have to know is whatever you need it for. I don't know a lot of the engineering related functions in Excel because I don't have to. What I do have is confidence to learn. So if I became an engineer tomorrow, I could sit down and learn the engineering functions that I needed. So having that confidence is what helps you be free of the shackles of I can't, and gets you into the mode of I can if I just take the time. That's why I think confidence is very, very important for learning in general, but it applies definitely to spreadsheets, because they're a thing where your learning journey is growing at every day. Every day, I'm also learning every day. Everyone who uses Excel every day learns new things all the time. And all it takes is just the ability to just open your eyes and look around a little bit. And as well as that, in keeping with that, there's this thing which you may have heard if you're in business called best practice. And what that means is doing things the right way, because there's many different ways to solve problems often. You can solve problems in ways that work, which means that they are effective, but that are inefficient, which means take a lot of time. So effectiveness and efficiency are, effective means, does it work? Yes or no? Efficiency doesn't means, is it going to save me time, money, effort? That's what efficiency means. So being effective is not enough, because you might not have enough time to solve every problem slowly. You may have to solve things fast or at a high scale. So you want to be able to do things in the right way so that you can solve them quickly and therefore be able to grow better. So in spreadsheets, what this means is you want to set things up in the correct way so that as your business grows or as your spreadsheet gets bigger, things don't get more complicated. Because if you're just replicating the same problem over and over again, then you can solve it in the same way. But if you've just got things all over the place and you have to try and keep track of what's going on, and as things get bigger, they get more messy, it's going to lead itself to it's not going to work out. It's going to be a disaster at some point. You're going to just give up. So having your columns and rows in the right structure, which I'll talk about soon, having your cell formats correct, having, choosing the right functions to solve the right problems, that's what's going to get you towards being able to grow and scale better. And it might seem a little bit vague now, but once you start using a spreadsheet, you'll see that there's many different ways to do things. And ultimately having an attitude of always looking for the best way, doing something right and doing it once only, that's what we want. In general, we only want to try and we want to minimize the amount of input that you have to do to the computer, let the computer do all the heavy lifting. So having the attitude of best practice in business and in spreadsheets is definitely the best way. So, a second. Okay, let's actually now get started. So let's take off the slides, and we're going to actually get into making our own spreadsheet. If you've done this before, then just hold on. But for those who haven't, we're going to go to the browser. We'll close this for now. And we're going to open a new browser window and just type in sheets.google.com. If you're already signed in, you get to a list like this, where you have a bunch of things that you've already made. If you haven't made anything before, it's going to be empty. Along the top here, you have all these templates, which are useful for certain things where you can choose templated documents. But we're going to just start at blank. So I'm going to click over here on this plus button, which means add a new spreadsheet. And that's it. You now have your own spreadsheet. That's all there is to know about making a spreadsheet. You've made it. No matter what happens now, you've made the spreadsheet. It's saved in your Google Drive, and every edit that you make is saved. So don't worry about losing data. And that's the idea of making a spreadsheet. Now, obviously, you want to do more than just making a spreadsheet. So let's talk about the layout and the user interface. And we're going to go through these again we'll go through them somewhat briefly, with a bit of detail here and there where I feel it's important. For as you use your sheets more and more, you're going to be learning more which menus are applicable to you, which menus are not so useful, and you'll figure out how these features work. Again, this isn't more of an overview, it's more of a webinar, and for a full course, you can do that afterwards. So first thing to know about is what's called tabs or sheets. So there's a structure here, there's a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is as follows. This is a spreadsheet, this whole window is a spreadsheet. Each spreadsheet can have multiple tabs or multiple windows. It means the same thing. The same way that in your internet browser, you can have multiple tabs within one window. So down here at the bottom, you see where it says sheet 1. That's the default name for every sheet that you start off with. So that gives you a whole list of cells. These boxes are all cells, and you can put data in here if you like. You can start typing away. To add another sheet, you click on the plus button. Now you have sheet 2. Sheet 1, I can put in some test data here. I'm just typing some words in. But in sheet 2, you see it's not there because sheet 2 is a whole different set of cells. So we're still operating inside the same spreadsheet. We have a different tab or a different sheet. So that's the idea about sheets. You can change the name by double clicking and typing in a name. You can delete a sheet. You can duplicate a sheet. So now you have 2 of them with a copy. You can give the sheets colors underneath if you like. There's many different ways you can do things with sheets. You can hide them if it's relevant, maybe a bit more of an advanced tool, but that's the idea of what a tab or what a sheet is. So most sheets that you're going to be using, most spreadsheets are going to contain multiple tabs because one of them might have all the data in it. One of them might have some calculations. One of them might have some charts. One of them might have a list that you need for some other thing. Often you have too many sheets. And if you're working in business already and you've come into a job which someone was working in previously, you might see that there's just a spreadsheet, which is called master spreadsheet. And then just everything is in there. There's 50 tabs. That can be a bit hard to handle. So use tabs in moderation. There are certain conventions about when you're meant to use separate tabs of things, but there are times also when you could use the same tab for multiple things, or when it's worth making a new spreadsheet to separate different ideas into different spreadsheets. The same way that you don't, put every single thing you have into one document, you would also don't put every single piece of data you have into one spreadsheet. They're meant to be used as files according to your needs. So that's the idea of tabs. Now, let's talk about the toolbar. The toolbar is this area over here where I'm highlighting all this row of options. And these are all shortcuts to do certain commonly used formatting or other menu options that Google Sheets is making available to you very simply because they're used very often. So from the left, we'll just go through some of these. We have here undo and redo. If you make a mistake, you can undo it. If you want to then redo what you undid, you can redo. There's common shortcuts for this on a Mac are Command Z and Command Y, or on a Windows Control Z, Control Y. We have over here zooming. If you want to zoom in closer to see what's going on, then you can use that. These over here are some formatting things. So if I have, let's say, 100, but I want to make it look like dollars, click on the cell, click on this $sign, and I get a currency format. And we're not going to discuss formats in detail in this class, but the idea of a format is that it just changes how something looks. So 100 is the same, whether it's 100 just as a number or $100, or it could be 100%, or now that's actually 10,000% because 100 is 100 ones. Every one is 100%. We could add decimal places if that matters to you. And there's more formats you can go into here. So that's the formatting area. Then we have our font area. So we can change the font of some wording, which is not very common usage in Excel. We're not trying to do, design so much and making documents for presentation, but there are times where it could be useful for you in certain reports that you might want to make to choose certain fonts. So you have all these availabilities over here, and you can maybe even add some more fonts from Google. I usually leave everything on Arial, but that's totally up to you. Then we have the font size, of course, which can be very useful for headings. We can make things bold, italics, strike through. You can change the color of text. You can do underlining using Command U on a Mac or Control U on a Windows. So those are all different sort of basic formatting things you can do. You can change the background of the cell color to be some sort of yellow. People get very fancy with this kind of thing. I usually just use sort of these light colors in this row, the third row, because these bright colors up top just make for, a bit difficult reading. So typically I'm going to just stick with black text without all this extra formatting, and we'll keep the background as white, put the text back to 10. Next we have borders, which means that you can put, thicker borders around certain cells or areas of cells. By default, you have these grid lines, which are just separating each cell. Those can be turned off in a menu that I'll show you soon. And to make borders, which could be useful for certain times that you want to make certain shading or certain lines, you can highlight, and then you have the borders menu over here. You can choose to do all borders that you've highlighted, or just the inside ones, just the outside ones, just the vertical ones, horizontal ones. You can choose around. You can choose the different colors of the borders, and then you can choose the certain pattern or weight of the borders. So to give an example, I can do like that and give all those cells borders. Then I could maybe change the weight to something thicker, and then just click on the outside borders. And now I have this box with some borders inside of it. And it's really up to you how you design your borders if they're relevant to you. Now you know how to do it. So there's that. This is merging cells, but I won't cover that. Next, we have text alignment. So we have left, middle, and right, which is, you'll know about this from regular Word documents. You can have things in the left of the cell, which is the default for any text. You can have in the middle, or you can have any right aligned text. You'll notice that this number over here is automatically right aligned. Numbers, as opposed to text, are automatically right aligned. You can always change it, but by default, they will come on the right, whereas text will come on the left. Then we have vertical alignment, which is within the cell. How high is the text going to be? Right now, it fills the whole cell, so you can't really tell. But if I was to make this row quite a lot taller, then now you can realize that this is aligned to the bottom of the cell, as opposed to now being on the top, or here being in the middle. So typically it's not relevant if your cell heights are just the standard, because then your text will be the same height and everything will be equal. But if you do have a bigger row or a taller row for whatever reason, then you can always change the alignment. Over here we have text wrapping, which means if your text overflows into you have more text than the width of this. So if we just go test data, and we type it a few times, you can see now how it overflows from cell C6, which is column C, row 6, overflows into D. So the data is still contained inside cell C6, but it's overflowing. And the reason for that is because of the certain setting we have over here, which is that automatically it's going to overflow. So if you see this icon, you see how the arrow goes over the line because it's going to overflow. If we wanted to make sure that it stays as it is and doesn't overflow, we can choose the clip icon instead. So now it just stays in its column. You can obviously resize the column to make it to be able to see, but that's what clip does. And text wrapping means that it's going to wrap around and give you multiple rows, multiple lines of text. Obviously, if we were to make this bigger, then no longer we need the wrapping anymore. So wrapping is only there based on the width of the column and how much text you have. You can always double click to get the exact width that you need of your columns. So that's the idea of text wrapping. Rotation of text is pretty irrelevant for now. And these we're going to leave off as well for now. So that's the toolbar, basically. These are shortcuts that you're going to use semi-often. And all these are available in these menus somewhere, but these are put out for you for easy access. So let's now discuss the menus. And again, we're going to go through some of them that are important and some of them we'll skip and you can use them whenever you like. The menus are over here. These are the menus: file, edit, view, etc. So file has like some file related settings like, to share or to download to a PDF, to rename or delete, things like that. We have edit, which can do undo and redo, as we've mentioned. It can do cut, copy, and paste, which you typically would use your keyboard for that. You do Control X for cut, Control C for copy, Control V for paste. And you can see over here, these are the shortcuts. On a Mac, that little 4 clover symbol refers to the command button. If you look on your Mac right now, you can see that's on the command keyboard as well. So you can have a lot of shortcuts here and you'll get used to using certain shortcuts. Some people really, really love shortcuts. And if you want to find all the shortcuts, then you can click on help and you can go to keyboard shortcuts. There actually is itself a keyboard shortcut to get to the keyboard shortcuts list, which is over here, which is command and slash. So if you're really into that, then that's great. I use them for sometimes, but often just pressing a button can be even faster. So up to you. You can know them and then do whatever you like. We have over here also paste special, which is a different way of pasting, which means that, if let's say you're using a Word document and you're pasting some text from the internet and it has, it's a very big text with a nice font and it's got red and it's underlined or something, and you paste that into your document, it's often going to come across with a lot of that formatting involved. But in a spreadsheet, if you want to just paste something without all the extra trimmings and just have the data, like just the words, then you could use something called paste values, which means just paste the actual essence of what I'm trying to do, just the words or the numbers. I don't want all the extra formatting and things like that. This is very useful when you have functions and formulas that output text, which is very common. And then you want to actually paste the result of those functions. So you would paste them somewhere else using values. That way it removes the function from what you've done and just pastes the actual result, the words. So this can be useful when you're a bit more down the line, and there's a few more options here of different ways to paste. Then we have view, which is, certain toggles you can turn on and off. So if I go to the show area and I turn off this grid lines, you can see now all the grid lines are gone. The cells still remain as they are. So this is just a viewing thing, but in certain scenarios, you might want to have the grid lines off for certain times. You can put them back just as easily. Then we can show and remove the formula bar, which is just that bar that just got removed. And at certain times, when you get a bit more into your usage and you're using more formulas, you can have this thing where you show formulas themselves, because typically, let's say, for example, I do, 10 plus 6. So the answer is 16. But if I want to see what I've actually written into the computer, the actual formula, at certain times you're looking for which cells have formulas, which cells don't. I can go show formulas, and now I can see how I've written equals 10 plus 6. So that could be useful when you get a bit further on in your usage. The freezing area, idea behind freezing is something that I cover more in a course, but the idea is that if you have a lot of data and you're going to be scrolling down, you see now I'm scrolling down many rows, often you're going to have a heading row right here, which says, so something like name, address, payment, something like that, let's say, and you have your information all here. If I was to scroll down to get to the next people, now I don't know which column is which. So by freezing, which you do by highlighting this row, clicking view and freeze and one row, that now puts a gray bar there and it holds the row frozen so that when you scroll, the heading still stays there. So that's a very nice feature which you can use for columns, for rows. It's very much used in my day-to-day thing. Grouping is not so relevant for now, so we'll leave that off. Zooming we've mentioned. Insert has a whole bunch of things to do with inserting more rows or more columns. But the typical way that I would tell you how to insert a column or row is to put your mouse on a certain column that you want to insert next to, right click, and then go insert left or insert right. If I click left, it's going to add a new one. So now you couldn't really tell, but I'll do it here so you can tell better. Now you can see there's a new column here. And if I type some name here, you know, Ruvain, and then I want to add another row, I right click on the number and do add one below. And so that's the idea of adding rows and columns. Insert has some more things, some more extra features, which we're not going to cover here. Formatting, we've mentioned slightly. There's different ways to format text. There's all different sorts of numbers and ways you can do it, accounting style or scientific style, percentage style, rounded or dates. Formats is a whole big topic in and of itself. And then text, we've seen already a lot of these formatting options. Data menu has things to do with filtering and sorting, which we won't be covering in this webinar, but they're very useful tricks for, you know, sorting data A to Z or alphabetically or numerically. And filtering is for, you know, picking out certain values that matter to you. These are, you know, your bread and butter as anyone who's using a spreadsheet is going to be using sorting and filtering. The rest of this is also not so relevant for now, and nor is tools or extensions. Extensions are basically just add-ons that you can add to Google Sheets to have more functionality, certain packages that are for statistics or for extra functionality that is not built in. If you get to that sort of level of a power user, you might want to get certain add-ons from the Google Chrome you know, shop, but and most of them are free. Typically not relevant. I almost never use them, so up to you. And the help menu is just if you want to search for something, you can search there. So those are basically the menus, and that's the UI. So UI stands for user interface. So now you see, I can give this spreadsheet a name. Let's just call this, you know, webinar. And so there's the general idea. So all columns are numbered, and all rows are, all columns have letters A, B, C, D, and all rows have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that means every cell, which is at the intersection of a column and a row, you say the column letter and then the row number. So this cell currently is D6 because it's in D, which is highlighted, and 6, which is highlighted to D6. And you can see over here, top left corner, that's the name of the cell, which is D6. It's going to be very useful, as we're going to mention at the end of the webinar today. We're going to talk about why that matters to us. So let's now move on to the next bit, which is going into the idea of what actually is a function. And you may have come here today with the intention of learning a lot of functions. Unfortunately, we're only going to cover about one function in this webinar, but I want to give you more essential ingredients that you'll actually need, because learning a function can become very easy once you know how to learn a function and what a function really is. So essentially what a function is, it's a magic box. It's a machine that Google Sheets already has pre-programmed in, that you give an input, it does something and gives you an output. So for example, the idea of adding up numbers could be considered a function. If I give it 5, 5, 10, it's going to add them together and give me 20. So the idea of adding is like a function. Or a printer could be a function. You give it paper, you give it ink, you give it a file, and it will output a printed physical copy of your document. So a printer can be a function. Even if you zoom out a little bit, an entire factory which creates, you know, plastic toys could be considered a function, because you give it raw material, paint, staff, electricity, space, and it outputs, you know, your plastic toys. So really, it's just a thing which does something for you. So functions are the main reason people use spreadsheets is for functions, because the functions make everything you do go a lot faster. So most of what you're going to be using is not just simple math like 10 plus 5 or 12 times 2. It's going to be using things like sum. Sum is a function which can add up tons of numbers, or things like if, which give you the ability to choose based on certain conditions of what's true, what's not true. You can choose certain directions the spreadsheet can go. You can make it do things based on a yes answer or a no answer, or things like VLOOKUP, which is a bit more of an advanced feature, which can, if you have a whole set of data, you can look up certain data and return certain corresponding information. So there's lots of different functions, and you can find a list by going to insert and go into functions and then go into all. And you can see here, every function has a name, and there's tons of functions out there, and more of them are being built at all times. And you do not need to know even 10% of these functions. As I've mentioned, you only have to know what's relevant for you. So some of these are so obscure and so specific and niche to their industry that you don't have to know them. So the typical categories of functions that I believe can be useful, which I teach in my general course, are logical functions, which means checking if things are true or not or false. We have mathematical functions. These are basic maths like adding things together or averaging or finding the minimum or the maximum or counting things. We have lookup, which is very useful when you have lots of data and you want to use an ID to find a name, or use an ID to find a price. A scanner in a store, when you scan an ID and it finds the price, that's in the background using a lookup function. It could be a bit more sophisticated, but the idea is that it uses an ID, which is the barcode, to find a price or a name of the item, or a customer if you want. We have text manipulation, which is just different ways to work with text, extracting bits of text from other ones, or adding different bits of text together, or changing the way that certain formats work. We have date and time, which can work with date values, and you can change one date to a different sort of date. You can add dates together or find the difference between dates. Financial is more for, if you're working in mortgages or loans with interest, these can be very useful for figuring out payments and percentages and interest rates. And informational functions are a bit more obscure. They are often used together with other functions to tell the computer what's going on, and then it allows the computer to figure out what to do based on what's the current status is. So they're a bit more obscure, but these are some categories that I teach in my general course. And basically you learn them as you go. As you feel you need something, then you can learn them. I'm going to teach you today how to learn a function, because that's what really got me advanced in my knowledge, was the ability to go online and look up a function that I needed. I didn't even know I needed it. I'd go into a forum and I would say, go into Google and say, how do I do this and this and this? And then it would give me a page. Someone would say, oh, just use the index function. And I'm like, what's the index function? I don't really know what that is. So I go into Google, and so index function, then it would give me a whole page, and the ability to understand that page and understand what to do, that's what gets you to be able to learn. It's like, if you learn Smicha, you can't remember everything that you've learned, but you know where to go in the Shulchan Aruch to find the answer. Or if in Gemara, you can always find where it is and look it up. So being able to look up any function online and get how it works, that's very useful, because no one's going to be able to teach you everything in one shot, as I've mentioned. So that's the idea of a function. Now, we're moving at quite a good pace here, so we are going to have time for questions. I wanted to first get to the brass tacks, which is what I believe is a little bit more complicated things, which we'll spend a bit more time on, just to get you really into things. Because so far, we haven't done any live tutorials of real things. This has been more of an overview. Let's do a little bit of brass tacks. So the first thing is, what are the ingredients of a function? We mentioned what a function does, that it receives inputs, does something, depending on what it is, and then it gives you outputs. So we need to know what the ingredients are in order to know how to learn a function. So a function has primarily two parts to it. It has the arguments, which are the inputs. Arguments is the computer speak for inputs to a function. Arguments, also sometimes known as parameters, but I'm going to use either word interchangeably. And they are the inputs that a function needs. So for a printer, for example, a real life physical printer, those would be the paper, the number of copies you need, the file, the ink, whether it's stapled or unstapled, whether you're putting 4 pages into one or just one per page. Are you using two, back-to-back printing? These are all the inputs. These are all the instructions that the printer needs. Once you press print, you don't care how it works. The printer uses all different sorts of technology to print things. We don't care how that works. We just care that we give it the right information, and then it will give us the physical document. So with a function as well, there are certain inputs, and you have to tell them to the computer in a certain format, in a right way, in the right order, and then it will work for you. And you're going to learn how that works. So that's what the inputs are. Now, in order to know what the arguments are for a certain function, you have to look at what's called the syntax. This word syntax essentially means the blueprint of a function. Every function has a specific syntax, which doesn't change, and it lists out what the inputs that are needed for that function are and how they have to be typed in. So, for example, with a printer, we use our example again. You can't necessarily talk to your printer. It can't hear you. You have to type the number in on the keypad, type in 6 copies. If you talk to it and say 6, it may not be able to understand you. So you've given it the same input, but in the wrong way. So similarly with a function, you may be able to convey information in multiple ways, but the function requires you to give it in a very specific way. So the syntax shows you what the arguments are, what order they're in, and also how to type them in. And this can be found online. Once you know how to do that, you can then just try it yourself and you'll be good to go. So let's see what syntax looks like. Now, this itself is not any real function. This is just an example function. And we'll go through it piece by piece, because this is a very, very important slide in order to learn how to learn a function. So first off, whenever you type in to a spreadsheet and you want to type something which is not just text or a number, you want to do an actual function or a formula, you have to use the equal sign, because the equal sign tells the computer, I don't want to type in text. I want to type in an instruction to the computer. So you just do it once at the beginning and that's it. So that's equal sign. Then you type in the name of the function. So here, this would be the name of the function usually. Whatever it is, it could be sum, could be if, could be and, could be count, a VLOOKUP, payment. There's many different functions, as I've mentioned. You just type in the name. It doesn't need to be in capitals, but often it's written out in capitals just to differentiate it from everything else. Then within the function, which is bounded by an opening bracket and a closed bracket, you have your arguments. Each argument exists separated by a comma. So argument 1 gets typed in, then a comma, then argument 2 gets typed in, then a comma, and then argument 3. And this is just an example. Some functions might only have one argument. Some might have 2, some might have 5, some might have an unlimited amount, as you can see here with this ... Some you can give it an unlimited amount of inputs and it will work based on that. Now, it's possible that these inputs are mandatory, which, most commonly an input is required. You must give the function an input. You must tell the printer that you want to print 5 copies. But there are some arguments, some inputs that are not required and that you could leave blank. And if they're left blank, then the function will use its default usage. So a printer, let's say you have a nice color printer. If you don't tell it that you want black and white, it's going to assume to do color. Or if you don't tell it that you want to staple the copies, it's going to just leave them unstapled. So in the same way, some functions have some arguments which are optional. If you want to choose something different from the default, you need to type in what you want. And these arguments are often bounded by square brackets. The difference is that these square brackets don't actually get typed in. You just type in whatever the input that you want is, and then you close the bracket, the outside one, and it will work. So this can look pretty obscure for someone who's never seen a function before, and it is. This is a bit theoretical, and we're going to show you an example, but you have to understand the fact that a function has a name. It's got arguments that are separated by commas, and those are the inputs, and then around those arguments are these curved brackets, and that is the syntax. Every function has it, and these are going to be called different things. Argument 1 here is just an example. They're going to have names which will tell you what to put in them. So let's see. You know what? Let's actually see an example now, because I want to really show this to you. So I've got this thing covering my browser. So let's just see if functions. I'm just going to type in if function. So we'll even watch what I Google and you'll be able to see what to do. So if function, Google Sheets. If is the name of a function. You can see here, the first result is if function, Google Docs editor help. That's what you want, because we're looking at Google now. There's many different ways you could find it on HubSpot or W3, or there's many different websites which we'll talk to about an if function, but we want to get the essential documentation page, which is right here. So what's going on here, but we'll just go right organized through this. The if function, first of all, returns one value if a logical expression is true and another if it's false. So in simple English, what that means is you have a test, you give the computer a question. If the answer to the question is yes or true, then you give the computer one instruction. And if it's false, you give another instruction. For example, if I tell my friend to go to the store and I say, if there's chicken at the store, buy chicken. If not, buy meat. It's a very simple instruction that you might give to everyone all the time. A computer can similarly handle a function like that and handle the ability to do many things based on what's true. So the key is that you give the computer the inputs. You tell the computer, here's the question. Is there chicken at the store? If there is, buy it. If not, buy meat. You just do it. The computer will then figure out the answer, whether there is or whether there isn't. The computer will walk to the store and figure it out for you. And then everything will go from there. So Here you have now some sample usage, which is just some examples of how it actually looks to use the function. And here is the syntax. This is what I mentioned before. So we have here, this looks similar to what I showed you on the slide. We have the name of the function, if. We have the curved brackets on either side. And then inside, we have these arguments. Argument number 1 is called logical expression. Remember, they have names, then a comma. Argument 2 is called value if true, and then a comma. Argument 3 is called value if false. Now, what do these mean? Let's see. Bullet points. Logical expression argument means it's an expression or a reference to a cell which contains an expression that means some sort of logical value. Now, this again, they often don't write things so well, and you get used to how the language works here. But what this means is you're basically asking the spreadsheet a question, and that question is going to be true or false. Like, is this number bigger than this number, or is this text equal to this text? If it's true, great. If not, we'll give a different instruction. Okay, that's what this logical expression does. So in here, in this part of the function, you type in some sort of input. You know, is cell C6 greater than cell D6? Okay, so you just type in C6 greater than D6. You use a greater than symbol on the keyboard. Now, value if true means you give the computer what to do if it's true. So the value that the function returns means the computer prints it out if it's true. So this could be, it could say that let's say you're looking at your company's revenue for the year versus a different company's revenue for the year. So yours is in cell C6 and theirs is in cell D6. So if yours is greater than theirs, yours is 10 million and theirs is 8 million, then maybe you'll have value if true, we'll say yes with an exclamation mark, like you're happy about that. So you can type into the function the word yes, and then the computer will write it out for you. But if it's not, if your company does worse and your number is 7 million and theirs is 8 million, then you can have the word no, or better luck next time, or sorry. You can just write words. The function can return words for you. So this is an example of looking through and you can see how it's optional. It's by default, it's you can leave it optional, which means that this is a pretty unusual thing to do, so we won't cover that. But the idea is that there are some arguments that are optional. So looking through this page, if you get a bit better at this, you can look through some more things. There's some examples. I don't really use anything other than just the syntax area and maybe the sample usage. The notes can be useful, but down here I find these examples are just a bit hard to follow sometimes, so I don't really use them. And once you get used to learning functions, then it gets easier. So you'll be able to follow a syntax a lot better. Right now, it may be like, well, what's an input and what's an argument? What is logical expression? But they'll become more familiar to you as you go along. The idea is to understand that every function needs inputs. They're called arguments, and the function will then give you out certain outputs. And that's the key to learning a function. That really is the key. So that's syntax. Now, the next thing is cell referencing, and this is something which you could spend a long time learning, but I figured it's nice to just introduce the idea because really this is the key to becoming a lot faster and a lot more accurate with your spreadsheets. So when I mentioned in my last example about an if function, I said, is C6 greater than D6? I didn't say, is 10 million greater than 8 million? And the reason we do that is that every cell has a name, as we've shown before. Well, that's not it. Every cell has a name. So this cell is D5. We can type in, we just remove this for now. And just type in some numbers. Okay. And this cell over here has F9. So we can type in some more numbers. So if I wanted to check which one's bigger, I could use the equal sign, because again, we're doing some magic here. We're not doing some typing. And I could just say, is 100,000 greater than 5,000? Hit enter, and the computer says true. So there's an example of logical expression where I've asked the computer a question and the answer is true. But what if then I change this to be 1? It still says true, even though it's not anymore. And the reason is because I've just programmed in these numbers. I've hard coded the numbers in, which means I've typed the numbers into the expression rather than pointing to the cell. So these cells are actually useless. They don't relate to this function at all, or to this formula here at all. What you want to do instead is refer to the cells, and then whatever number is in the cell, that's what's going to be part of the question. And how you do that is as follows. You do equals, and then you type in E9. So it understands that you're referring to a certain cell, and then ask, is that greater than F9? And you hit enter, the answer is true. But if I was to add a few zeros here, now it changes to false, because it just refers to whatever information is in the cell. So that's very key to be able to use referencing of cells in order to get things correct. So let's go into now, I'm going to show you this with a spreadsheet, and I'll share this with everyone after the class, same as the slides, by the way, they'll be shared. And we have over here a whole bunch of sales data, which I use in my usual course, but let's just skip over to the referencing tab, which shows an example of some referencing and some means referring to cells. So this is a cell, this is a cell, and we have over here some sort of profit calculation that we're doing. We want to see what our profit's going to be for the next 5 years that we're forecasted. So we have our revenue and expenses forecasted, and as we know, profit is revenue minus expenses. So inside this cell, the wrong thing to do would be to type in equals 130 minus 45,000. It's the wrong thing to do. It gives you the right answer. But as I said, there are many different ways to solve one problem. And this is the wrong way to do it, because now, oh, we messed up our forecasting. Really, it's only going to be 110,000. But look, that still gives you 85,000, because these cells are irrelevant. I could delete them and the number would still be there. That's not what you want. You want to always be referring to the cell. So let's go back and do this correctly by typing in equals D6 minus D7. And sometimes Google Sheets will give you a suggestion of what it thinks you want to do. They can be true and they can be wrong. So you have to always review them before you accept the suggestion. I usually just type it in myself just to make sure. Hit enter, and there's the number. So that's the idea of using referencing for accuracy. Now, what about speed? Speed actually is the more common usage of cell referencing, which is the idea of dragging something that you've done to more cells. So I could then go through into this cell and type in equals E6 minus E7, and then the next one, I'd be here for a while. If I had a lot more, I could be here for a while. And there are times where you want to drag things down and do the same calculation over and over again for thousands of rows. So what you do is you type it in once, and then you go into this blue box over here. Now your mouse becomes a cross. Click it and drag your mouse across as far as you want to go, and then let go. And automatically, it's done the magic for you. It's figured out that the same way you wanted to have this cell minus this cell, you also want to have this one minus this one, and as follows and so forth. It's going to figure it out for you. And now, if any of these numbers change, the answer changes as well. If this changes, everything changes. Everything is now correct. We did it very, very fast. So ultimately, all you had to do was type in one template here, which is equals D6 minus D7, and then drag it across. And there is a bit more to know about referencing of cells. There are times where you don't want to, you want to drag, but you want certain things to stay the same or not to stay the same. It's a bit of a concept which you can get into in a later course, but the idea is that you want to always be referring to cells whenever you're doing calculations. You don't want to be hard coding or typing in the numbers directly, because you want to have the ability for data to change, but the function itself should never change. The function you just type in once, and then as the data changes, the inputs to the function then are correct still, because you're just referring to a box. You're saying, whoever you are, do this. I don't need to know what your name is. I just need to know that you need to do this for me. If your name tomorrow changes, if your age changes, it doesn't affect me. Just you do that thing. So in this context, a cell is just saying, this cell, I want this cell minus this cell, rather than saying, I want this number minus this number. So a cell is a box which contains information inside of it. We want to just say this box minus that box, or this box times this box, or what's the difference between these two boxes? That's the idea of cell referencing. And it's very crucial. So let's now do also another function. We already looked at the if function. Let's look at now the and function, which is the ability to check if certain conditions are true. And we saw before, I tested out if one number is higher than another number, and we got an answer which was true or false. Whether if it was, it's true, and if it's not, it's false. So the and function gives you the ability, instead of just checking one thing, is to check many things, because often you might want to do a calculation which requires first to have a few conditions to be true. Let's give an example here. So I'm going to go into the spreadsheet to the and function tab, You can see here, by the way, I have all different tabs. So I've got 5 tabs. I have data, I have structure, I have rows and columns, so referencing, and haven't gone through all of them, but we're going to go look now for the AND function. And you see here, I've removed the grid lines because I want to just make it more visually pleasing. I've put some borders in around the edges. This has got a dark black border. This has got a dotted border. I put in some cell shading. I have some bigger text and small text. I have some bold. So this sheet specifically is meant for teaching. So I've used a lot of design here to make things a bit more easy to use. But when I'm looking at my data sheet, just full of numbers and words, it's a lot more plain and less design. There's a little bit of bold and a little bit of shading, but inside here, all the numbers are just plain old numbers with Arial 10. So you can see how design is useful sometimes, but sometimes not. So back into the AND function, we have our employee whose name is Jim Henson. It's a totally random name. And he made for our company as a salesperson $300,000, and he brought in 8 clients this year. Now, in order for Jim to receive a bonus in his annual, in his paycheck, he needs to have brought in 200K in sales and also brought in 10 clients. So between you and me, we know the answer is going to be no bonus, because he brought in a great amount of sales, but he was 2 clients short. So that's great that me and you know that, but we want the computer to do it ourselves, because if we have many different, many different salespeople, we want to be able to find the answer to that very quickly so that our accountant can then just peel off the bonuses at the end of the year for each person very quickly. So let's go show an example of how the computer will give us a true or false answer for these numbers. So what we do is we type in inside this cell, we're going to do our function because we want the answer to be over here. Type in our equal sign, as we've mentioned, always do equals whenever you want to type in some sort of function or formula, anything which is not just straight up text or numbers. And you just type in AND. So to do a function, you just type in the name of the function, open the bracket, and you are now inside the function. And here you see the syntax. It's given it for you. It's floating there for you. So you can always read off what you're meant to be doing. The first thing that AND requires is logical expression number 1. And you may actually remember the syntax name from the if function we had, where it also asks you for logical expression, which means it asks you to give it a question for which the answer is yes or no, or true or false, meaning ask me something, ask me anything, ask me a question. And then the next thing also is logical expression number 2. And then there's ... because you can ask the AND function as many things as you want. If they're all true, the total answer will be true. If one of them's false, the answer is false. And the reason for that is in human logic, that's how it works as well. If I say, can you please tell me if you are male, above 20, below 60, and in good shape, then you're fit for the army. You have to be all those 4 things. If you're not one of those things, then you can't go. You have to have all 4 of them. If I say, are you male or over 20 or below 60 or in good shape, or is different from AND, or only requires one thing to be true, whereas AND requires all of them to be true. So logic is often used in sheets to do things. In this condition, we need to have Jim to have enough sales and enough clients. So the first thing we're going to do is just ask the question of whether his sales are greater than the number of sales that he requires. So his sales are inside cell D6. So type in D6. And the condition is inside cell D10. So we just do greater than D10. So far, you can see the answer is true. It gives you this sort of so far answer, but we're not done yet. So hit a comma. And now we're into the next part of the function. You can see in the syntax, which is just minimize it a bit, that now we're now into logical question number 2. And the reason that you can see over here that it's actually an optional argument. It's got square brackets around it. And the reason for that is because the AND function can handle 1 input only. That's fine. If you just do, are you male? And the answer is yes, then the answer is yes. It's just meant for using more than 1, but it can handle 1. So technically using the second, third, fourth, etc., they're all optional. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is check if his clients are enough. So his clients are in cell D7, but the required number of clients is inside cell D11. Close the bracket, and you see we now have all the parts we need. We have an equal sign, we have the AND name, which is the function, we have the opening and closing brackets at the beginning and the end, and then we have our 2 arguments, argument number 1 with a comma afterwards, and then argument number 2 with no comma. You don't put a comma at the end, only in between arguments. Hit enter, and you get the final answer, which is false. And the reason for that, as we mentioned, is because he didn't bring enough clients in. But if he actually did bring enough clients in, you see now it becomes true. So the function is always reading off whatever's in the cell and giving you the correct answer. If his sales actually dramatically, somehow we made a mistake, now it's false again. So you can have one function which just gives you all the answers all the time. So that's a very simple example of a function. And as mentioned, a function is not complicated. It's not a complicated actual machine. It's just the way that you type into a spreadsheet. So you just type in the name of the function, and then you type in what it needs, hit enter, and it does everything for you. Do you know how the computer figured this out? No. Do I? Maybe, but it's not relevant. It only matters that you know how to use the function, how to access the function. You don't have to know the coding that goes on behind the scenes. You just have to know how to use it, how to interface with it. Once you do, you can use it for whatever you like. So that's an example of the end function. And that brings us to the end of the brass tacks section of this overview. But I want to give you a few tips about the road ahead for spreadsheets. So the road ahead for most of you, if you're going to be using spreadsheets more, is long, but that shouldn't scare you, because a long road can be enjoyable and it can be useful. It can be insightful. Like anything that you do, when you start something new, it can be a long time until you become comfortable, confident. It happens to be that in Google Sheets, the learning curve is not so steep. It's long, but not steep. So you're just, you're learning more and more and more and more and more. And you can go, I'm learning all the time as well. And I've been doing this for 10 years. So the idea is that it's not a hard road, but it's a long road. So the more you learn, the more you will be able to learn. Same way it works with, Torah. So the road ahead, I would say there's a few important things to keep in mind. Number one is to understand the principles. Now, today we've actually focused a lot on principles. We're focused on, the idea of having a best practice attitude, meaning doing the thing right from the beginning. We're focused on syntax, how do you actually take apart a function and what does each part mean? We focused on making sure that you understand what different tabs are and what different sheets are and why you might do that. Now, that's the idea, is that not everyone learns. Some people just come into a new job and they just got to figure out, what's our current leads for our real estate market? Like, I don't know. Can you just relax? Like, I'm not sure. Like, I don't even know how to type anything in yet. Like, so they start learning how to do a function. They do count and they type it in, they copy and paste it from the internet and it works, but they have no idea what they just did. And they have no idea how to then learn more. So they're stuck in their own little box of what they copied from the internet, which it's a good start to go online and Google it, but you got to know more. You got to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then it will give you the ability to do things that are different slightly and be able to adapt and be flexible as the demand changes. Next thing to do that I think is important is to learn more functions and to practice. So I don't mean to go online and look up the top 50 functions. I mean, if you can learn that way, that's great for you. Everyone has their own article about what the best functions are of the year or the best new ones. There's all different sorts of blogs online about tech and spreadsheets. And some of them could be very useful for you and some of them could be not, because it's obviously just the author's opinion about what's useful. So as you progress in your work, whether it's personal or business, you can learn more functions just by asking questions to the internet of how do I do this? So if I would have looked up how do I check if two conditions are true in Google Sheets, then inevitably I would have found the answer to be AND function. So that's just how you do it. You just type in very simple English. You might have to tweak your words a little bit if you don't find any answers, but that's what you really do. And you'll get better at searching. Searching itself is an actual skill. Looking things up online, if you ask any computer programmer, that's the way to the top, is just being able to Google things. There's a acronym GIYF, which stands for Google is your friend. And that's the third point I have here, which is that Google every question you have. That's the way I do it. There were times when I was maybe 22 and I was sitting at home doing some stuff for work. And it was late at night and I probably shouldn't have been working at that point, but I was Googling how to do something. I had a really exciting project I was working on and I was just Googling and I just ended up going through this like 3-hour zone where I just figured out all this stuff. And I learned about 4 new functions and I put them all together and somehow it all worked. And I was like, my brain was just exploding by how much I just learned in one little session. Then it was like 3 a.m. and by that time I should have already been asleep, but ultimately I learned a lot. So there are times where you go through a little phase and you learn a lot and you Google things and that's all it is. And you get into a headspace where you can just learn. If you feel you're in a zone, then follow the zone, get into a state of flow and then you can learn more. So Googling really is the way to do it. Now, one thing we didn't mention, which is the fourth part here, is combine functions into formulas. Now, I mentioned that we have a factory, where you have one part of the factory, which is the assembly line, which, builds the physical toy. Then there's a part which paints the toy. Then a part which puts the box around it, the packaging. Then there's a part which does the barcoding. One does the shipping. So all different parts to an assembly line. And functions work the same way. You can have a function which will receive an input, do something, and then give an output. That output itself will then be the input for a new function maybe. And in that way, you'll have a few functions together in a sort of assembly line, which is now called a formula. A formula just means something that you created using functions, or just even just doing 10 plus 5 is a formula. It's basically anything which is not a named function is a formula. And you also use the equal sign, and combining functions together is very, very common. Once you start learning them together, often you're going to need just more than just one function. As I mentioned with the factory, just having a painter isn't enough. You need to have a builder, a painter, a packager, a labeler, and the same goes with functions and spreadsheets. And fifth of all, I would say, forget the stereotypes, really. As I mentioned in the very beginning of the attitude section, you don't need to be a whiz or a geek to know how to use spreadsheets. You can be the guy at your work that everyone looks to if you are that kind of person, and you can be a normal guy. Learning a spreadsheet is something which these days everyone should learn. I feel even that schools like middle school should start learning spreadsheets because they're so commonly used that everyone needs to know how to do it. So just free yourself from those shackles, and you have the ability to learn as much as you want. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to be here now for questions. There are going to be details if you want to contact me further on the slides, but I can't put them on the Zoom because they'll be blocked by YouTube when I upload this recording. So those will be on the slides, which will be all shared to you at some point in the near future. I want to thank you all for coming, and I'll be available now. We finished about 15 minutes early, which is great. And I'll be here for questions. If you have short questions, I'm not going to be answering long business questions that will, take a long time to solve. But please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. All right, I'm seeing a bunch of thank yous. You guys, you're welcome. It was great to have you all here. Obviously, you're free to leave if you don't have any questions. If you do, you can remain here and hang on. I'll pause the recording now just so that it's a bit more private if we have questions. So let me just do that. Where's that menu? There. Stop the recording.